I just wanted some clarification on tithing.
Being unable to forgive somebody who causes an offense
Does
towards
it really matter whether someone is Protestant or Catholic?
The genealogies are different from Matthew to Luke.
I was wondering what the Bible said in terms of what I should do.
This is Pastor's Perspective. We're here every Monday through Friday providing answers on a variety of topics, including the Bible, end times, other religions, and the family. Call right now with your question at 1-888-564-6173. That's 888-564-6173. You can also post your question at facebook.com/Pastor's Perspective. And now here again is your host, Brian Perez.
Hey there. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Pastor's Perspective program. We are here live on this beautiful Friday afternoon, at least beautiful here in Southern California. And Pastor Brian Broderson of Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa is here with me. And we've got a couple of guests in the studio, a couple of guys that are going to be at the 2020 Men's Conference at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa tomorrow. We've been telling you about it for weeks, yay, months. And it's here tomorrow, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. at Calvary Costa Mesa. You can still get your tickets at men.cccm.com. Pastor Brian, tell us who these guys are.
Tell us who these guys are. Well, to my right is Mark Jobe, and Mark is the president of Moody Bible Institute and the pastor of New Life Community Church in Chicago, right?
That's right.
And Mark and I met back in June because I had a chance to visit one of his campuses, and we had a nice little connection. And then, of course, Mark's joined us on our radio station, 107.9 K-Wave. So he came out today and he spoke to some of the local pastors. He's here tomorrow for the men's conference, and we're super excited about that. And to my left is Preston Perry, and it's great to see Preston sitting here in the flesh because I've been following him on Twitter or on Instagram and Twitter, I think. And to just have him here, I could reach out and touch him is it's awesome.
Thanks for
I've been wanting to have you for a long time. So, and Preston, so I've, kind of followed you on social media. I've followed some of your video stuff that you've done, with some of your evangelism and things like that. Mm-hmm. Your wife, a few people know a little bit about her, right? Jackie Perry.
A few people, huh?
A few people, yeah. I just saw on her, was it Twitter or Instagram, she just hit 300,000 or something.
Yeah.
Celebration.
She's up there.
She's up there.
Nice.
Yeah. So when, every year we sit down and we kind of, think about who we want to have for our men's conference. Mm. And as we were just brainstorming, you guys all just kind of converged in our minds, along with Daryl Strawberry, who's going to be with us, and Drew Dick. Mm. And so we're just super excited.
Thanks for having us. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
And Preston just made it. He had a little bit of a mishap on his way.
Oh, that's right.
Might have lost his wallet.
So if you see a wallet.
But his 5-year-old said that she saw the 1-year-old walking around with it.
Yeah.
So we're hoping that was an accurate report.
That's what the report said. But, it came from a 5-year-old, so who can know?
That's great.
Very true.
Yes, that is so good. So that's who's in the studio with us here.
Very nice, very nice. And Dr. Jobe, it is good to meet you. I've been listening to your program for the past few weeks here on K-Wave since we added it, and it's on at 8 p.m., so it might be a completely different audience. Those of you listening at 3 p.m. right now than the ones listening at 8 p.m., so after you hear Dr. Jobe today, I think you'll want to make sure that you tune in every night at 8 o'clock. But Bold Steps, great teaching, and we're just really blessed to have you here on our flagship station here in Southern California. Those of you listening around the country, you can listen to his Bible teaching. Is it boldsteps.org, I think is the website?
Boldsteps.something.org. Yes.
Let me confirm.
Yeah, I love the way Mark's looking for somebody else to help him out with
I'm looking for someone to help me out with that. Yeah. No, it really is great to be here in Southern California. I think I mentioned it before.
BoldStepsRadio.com.
There you go. There you go. Bold Steps Radio. I think I mentioned it. I have family members and relatives around this area, and so we've gotten a chance to come over here and just connect over the years, and some historic connection with this Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. Some of my relatives actually were really touched by God in this church, and so we have some historic connections there. So it's really a thrill to be back here.
Yeah, that's great. Both of you guys have really fascinating stories. So what I'd like to do is, Preston, I'd just like to, if you wanted to share just a little bit of your background, kind of a little bit of your history, how you came to faith and, where you're at today, what the Lord's doing. And then Mark, you and I have talked a lot about some of that too. And it'd be great just for our audience to hear that. So
Yeah. So I was 19 years old, and I was looking for God, and I was looking for God in like a lot of different areas. And I was living in Atlanta, Georgia at the time, and my mom moved me back to Chicago. And when she did, one of the guys that I grew up with, named Gary, was 4 or 5 years older than me. Mm-hmm. God had radically changed his life and saved him. And he was a student at Moody. This guy came from my context, and it was fascinating to me to see a guy on the outer exterior still looks like a guy that I grew up with, but his heart was different. Wow. Long story short, he took me in and he discipled me for 1.5 years. He took me under his wing. At that time, I didn't even know what discipleship was, but that's what he did. He took me everywhere he went. And through his life, through Gary's life, I saw the weight of my sin. I saw that I was far away from God, and I repented in my room. I wasn't at church. I wasn't, I just asked the Lord to save me. Yeah. And I was new after that.
Amazing.
Long story short, I started doing spoken word poetry, hooked up with a ministry out in California, LA, called P4CM, Passion for Christ Movement, and that's where a lot of my videos kind of went viral as far as spoken word is concerned. And then the last couple of days. No, go ahead. I'm sorry. I thought you were talking to me. So then from there, I think most people knew me for spoken word, but I always had a heart for evangelism and teaching the gospel, and I did that a lot. When I wasn't on YouTube. That's a part of my ministry that people didn't see. And my wife one day, she was like, "Preston, you need to make a public ministry out of this, especially because where I'm from, a lot of times you don't see young African American males engaging with other religions like Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons or Hebrew Israelites. And so I wanted to show my following that we have a place to engage with other worldviews. So I started a YouTube channel called Bold TV, where I'm just engaging with other religions and atheists and agnostics. And it kicked off, and people seem to like it. I didn't think they would, but people seem to like it.
Wait, did you say Bold TV?
Yeah, it's called Bold TV.
Come on, we got a theme going here.
Yeah, Bold TV, where we live and love truth.
I love it.
That is great. I've seen some of those videos. I've seen some of your conversations with people, and it's really good. And I was super impressed with your boldness, and not in any kind of a rude way, but just bold, and your competency. It's like, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about. So
man. A lot of times people put me in that category as apologist, but I just wanted to be an evangelist. Yeah. So I went out there and I started having conversations with people in different worldviews. So I had to study, and I had to read, the New World Translation and the Book of Mormon and the Pearl of Great Price. I had to read all of these things to effectively communicate with these worldviews in my neighborhood. So I just kind of
it's amazing because, and I don't know if you feel like this too, Mark. It's like, I'm the oldest guy in the room, just to clarify. But, I can think back, 30 years ago, for example, where Islam was not even on the map. It just, it existed in the East and Indonesia, but it didn't, just was nothing. And it was Jehovah's Witnesses. It was Mormonism. It was all of those things. Yeah. With the resurgence of Islam, it's like everything else sort of got eclipsed in a sense, and the new atheism. And it's almost like you forgot about like the Jehovah's Witnesses, and you forgot about the Mormons, and then you realize, hey, they go fill up a stadium with 100,000 people in it. Yeah. So they're still out there engaging. And honestly, Preston, it was when I saw you talking about it, it was kind of like, oh yeah, there's people out there that need the gospel that are in those pseudo-Christian cults still to this day. So, that's amazing. I think in the African-American community, there's quite a few people that have been influenced by Jehovah's Witnesses. Right?
Jehovah's Witnesses, and now the emergence of Hebrew Israelites.
We get calls about that every now and then. Tell us what that is.
Yeah, Hebrew Israelites are a group of, they will tell you that they are the children of Israel, but a lot of them are, African American or African descent, but they believe that they're part of one of the lost tribes of Judah, the 12 tribes of Judah, and they believe that God has given them an awakening to scatter the lost sheep. So if you go to a lot of the African American communities around the country, you will see these guys on corners telling people that Christianity is the white man religion, that the white man is the Edomite, that that we've strayed away from who we are, and that we need to realize that we're the Israelites, which is just false. Yeah, just false rhetoric, and so I've been reaching out to them cats a lot, talking to them, giving them the gospel, having conversations with them. But sometimes, unlike Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons, sometimes the conversations with Hebrew Israelites can become combative. They can be very aggressive. So a lot of times people stray away from them, especially when my white brothers and sisters try to reach them. They believe they just have a closed ear. So I think that it's very important for young African Americans who know the word, who know how to rightfully divide truth, to study not just what the Bible teaches, but what they believe, so we can effectively reach those guys. So
speaking of that group of people, do you feel like you've gained any headway with some of them?
Yeah, so I've built a lot of personal relationships with them. Last couple of times I tried to do videos with them because I have a very public ministry. They don't want to go on camera with me, which is kind of hard. The Hebrew Israelites claim to be like true historians. Unfortunately, they're very poor historians. So when I challenge them, they very rarely want to go on YouTube
publicly. They don't want to see that.
But I have a couple of like debates, or if you want to call them just conversations. I like to call them conversations that I have scheduled for May with some of the like leading Hebrew Israelites in Atlanta, Georgia. So hopefully it all works out. But
is there like a base? I mean, are they like a denomination? Would they consider themselves, or are they just sort of randomly scattered out?
So the thing about the Hebrew Israelites is that they are very divided within the I don't even want to call them a religion. There's a lot of different sects of Hebrew Israelites, but they started in the 1960s in New York. In New York, but they're scattered all over the United States. And sometimes you might meet Hebrew Israelites who don't believe that Jesus is God. Sometimes you might meet Hebrew Israelites that believe it. So it's a lot of different sects, and not all of them are aggressive. They vary. So I don't want to lump them in with a lot of but it's the aggressive ones that kind of make a lot of the headline news.
Now, do you find, say, your peers, your Christian brothers, are you finding some in your generation that have an inclination toward a similar kind of thing? Young guys that want to get out and evangelize and want to get out and, contend for the faith and all of that? Or
Absolutely. It's a lot of guys, especially in the urban community, who God had met and they love the Lord, who want to go out there and
that's great.
And defend the gospel with these guys. I think because a lot of young black people have left the church and became Hebrew Israelites. So I think it's a burden on a lot of young brothers and sisters in the black church. They're just like, man, we have to preach the true gospel, because it's just a lot of false theology floating around, and I think they use a lot of the things that happen in this country to say, you know what, that's why you should leave this white man's religion.
I get it. Totally. That, and God often raises up a person and then uses that person to influence many others, and I just think that that's wonderful. God's put this on your heart. He's raised you up. He's given you a voice, not just to reach Hebrew Israelites or Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons or whatever, but given you a voice to speak into the lives of other believers, to encourage them And even by example, to encourage them to engage. And that's awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And Preston, what comes to my mind is sometimes people use race for the religious purposes. For example, when I was in China, Mao used to say that the Christianity came on the war boats of the English. Because the first missionaries rode on some of the battleships. And so he would use that as, see, this is a white man's religion. They came on the war boats of the English. But in reality, they started doing some archaeological research and discovered that Christianity came via the Silk Road, and there's some historic Christian churches in China. So Christianity was in China way before the English brought it through the missionaries.
Absolutely.
And so, sometimes the race card is used to try to affect theology as well.
Yeah.
And not to mention that Christianity was in Africa in the 1st century.
Right.
Ethiopia.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. In the apostolic era.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
That's great, man. It's so glad. Just great to have you with us. So, Mark, your story is pretty fascinating, really. You grew up in Spain.
I did.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that.
So my parents were both converted at a Youth for Christ rally, Northern Indiana, decided they wanted to do the most radical thing that they could, be missionaries in the Amazon jungle.
Wow.
But there was nothing open there, so they ended up in Chile. And I was 6 months old when they left this country.
Wow.
When I was about 6, they moved to Spain. And they wanted to preach the gospel in a place that there was no gospel. And so they found a city of 130,000 people, no evangelical Protestant church at all. And that's where they started planting. So we met in a horse stable for the first 5 years because we were considered a cult, and our windows were broken, our doors were burned. My dad was taken in the secret police multiple occasions. It was very, very slow. In 1975, though, God opened up the doors, and we literally saw hundreds of young people come to Christ. So I grew up in a village in northern Spain, knew very few Christians because there was very few Christians around. But I saw the equivalent of a strong move of God that led hundreds of young people to Christ. And
it's almost like the Jesus People movement was going on here in Southern California.
It really was. I was telling Pastor Brian that it was very similar to a Jesus movement, sort of long-haired, hippie-ish, kind of living in communes, except that a lot of them were kind of coming out of the Catholic Church, being converted, having a real experience with God. And so I grew up, I was a little bit younger, but I grew up seeing a whole generation of people come to Christ. And I got to Chicago because someone was recording tapes of Moody radio teaching, sending them to my father in Spain. And I said, I want to go at least 1 year to learn the Bible in a place like that. So from a town of 200 people, Preston, my phone number was 8. I still remember it. I landed in the heart of Chicago, and I hated Chicago because it was just such a big city, and I was from a small town. But ultimately, God called me to the city of Chicago, where I've pastored for about 30 years.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was an amazing story you told at lunch of starting your first church or entering into pastoral ministry as a leader of a church at 21.
21. I was 21 years old, and I really did not like Chicago. I wanted to go back to Europe. But a pastor told me, he said, Mark, the nations have come to the city. Reach the city, reach the nations. I wanted to say, get thee behind me, Satan, because I didn't want to really hear that. But I couldn't let go of that word that had been deposited. And I just felt like I wrestled with that. And so at the age of 21, I found myself in the southwest side of Chicago, a tough neighborhood with a little congregation of 18 people in back of the yards neighborhood. And that's where we started, with drug dealers on the corner. And just saw a lot of the church grew up with mainly non-church people coming to Jesus with very little church background in back of the yards neighborhood. Now that little church has grown up. We minister to close to 7,000 people now, but it grew from a little small group to
That's amazing. You know, when I was in Chicago, and of course I've kind of known about this stuff from a distance. You know, I've only been to Chicago twice, and one time I did a wedding in Wheaton for a friend. And then I was there with our cohort. But the thing that really blew my mind, like I said, I knew it, but then I didn't know it. So I knew that there was a strong, we talked the other day when you were on the phone, that, obviously Chicago, LA, New York, London, Paris, whatever. They're all wicked, centers of human depravity and all of that. That's the reality, right? And I knew that about Chicago. And, you always hear on Chicago the death rate's highest in the nation and all of that kind of stuff, But what really kind of blew my mind was your church and a number of strong churches. James Meeks, James's friend, and to see Salem Baptist and what God's done there. And just to go, wow, God's working. It's kind of like the Corinthian thing, or Romans, where Paul says, where sin abounded, grace abounds more, right?
Absolutely.
That's what's happening. Yeah. And Atlanta's the same way, right?
Well, I've been there a year and a half. Going on 2 years. So a lot of my roots are in Chicago. Yeah, but Atlanta, I think all big cities have their level of depravity, but there's a large homosexual community. My wife's ministry is heavily involved with that. And it just, it has its sin, but God has planted some great churches in Atlanta, Georgia.
Yeah, and that's what God does. When we look at all of those epistles in the New Testament, those cities were all just like the ones that we're thinking about today, right?
They were. And I look at these big cities, I'm not overwhelmed and I'm not despondent, I'm not gloomy about it, because I see some incredible believers in churches, authentic, leading people to Christ. And there's some challenges, definitely some challenges. But like you said, where sin abounds, so does grace, and the light is a big contrast. And you have some very strong people of faith that have grown up in some tough areas, but it's helped shape their level of boldness for the gospel of Jesus.
I love that.
And Moody, Moody, D.L. Moody, Billy Graham, he kind of got his evangelistic roots in Chicago as well. Right. D.L. Moody, he was a product of Chicago, and he's the one that was quoted as saying, water flows from the top of the mountain down. Our cities are the great mountains of today. If we can reach our cities, it flows to the rest of the nation as well.
Yeah, and I think it's a great thing, that I'd say maybe in the past 20 years or so, there's been a big emphasis once again on reaching the city. So I lived in London for some years, planted and pastored in London. And then, to see, Tim Keller, Tim's impact and many others, in a city like New York, we mentioned Chicago, LA, there's plenty of stuff going on here. But man, to me, it's exciting because you just figure, look, the gospel is about people, right? So the more people, the better. We're in the people business, right? We're in the business of seeing people's lives change. So, man, let's get more people.
And they say, Pastor Brian, it was about, I think, a decade ago that it tipped over to over 50% now live in urban centers. It was, I think, a decade ago that it tipped past 51. It's probably higher than that now. So the majority of the world currently lives in urban centers.
Yeah, I'm feeling kind of out of the loop, here in Orange County.
Well, this feels, you're a suburb of LA. It's a great metropolitan area.
That's right. We had a friend of mine. We did a conference last year called Unbelievable with a friend of mine from London, Justin Briley, and Justin was he was promoting the conference, and he was saying Unbelievable LA, and these people are like, Costa Mesa is not in LA, okay? And he's like, look, I'm British. I don't know. I just, it seemed like it was close enough to say LA.
Yeah, it is. One of the things so Moody is right in the heart of Chicago, the Institute.
Yeah.
And my office has like a balcony that goes out. My favorite place every day, I pretty much go on that balcony and I step out on the balcony and I pray for the city because I feel like we're planted in the heart of the city for this reason, you know, and I look, the Gold Coast is right there, Chinatown is right there, and I like to do it every day. I like to go out there and I say, Lord, you've put us here in a place sometimes that people think are the darkest places in the world, but that's where you shine the brightest. So.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's so great. All right.
Can I reset real quick? Tell people what they're listening to.
Yeah, go ahead.
Pastor's Perspective, this great conversation. Brian Perez here, along with Pastor Brian Broderson from Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, where the 2020 Transformed Men's Conference is happening tomorrow from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. You can still get your tickets at men.cccm.com. These two men are just two of the men who are going to be speaking there. Mark Jobe from the Moody Bible Institute. You also hear him on Bold Steps Radio. And Preston Perry, a spoken word artist and apologist, although you say that you don't necessarily like using the term apologist.
He's an evangelist.
Evangelist,
whatever. I just like sharing the gospel.
So how can you teach us how to do spoken word?
I don't know if I can teach you guys.
Oh, man. Well, I can tell you can't teach me because I just can't.
Probably not like right now. Maybe if we, schedule a time where I could do some couple courses, that'd be great.
That's awesome.
Sign me up.
That's great.
Men.cccm.com is the website, and each ticket you also get a copy of Drew Dick's book. He's one of the other speakers, along with Daryl Strawberry, and worship led by Josh Kernow. But Drew Dick's book is called Your Future Self Will Thank You. You will get a copy of that book, along with D.L. Moody's The Overcoming Life, I think is the name of that one.
Yep.
Yes, and you did the foreword for the, it's been recently reprinted. And so you'll get both of those books along with your admission.
Yeah, and if you register online before midnight tonight, you can still get the reduced price. But if you walk on tomorrow, it's an extra $20. So
20?
Yeah.
Yikes.
Yeah, so you want to get in
now.
You want to get in now.
And here's my perspective on these men conferences as well. Let me tell you why you should attend. I think that sometimes it's not necessarily just what you learn, but it's what God sets in motion.
Yeah.
There's something about coming together as a bunch of men from different backgrounds. I believe that God wants to set things in motion at these places. Yeah. Steps that you need to take, decisions that you need to make. And coming away from your regular setting, that's what I always pray at these men's events. God, set something in motion that's more than just, hey, that was a great men's conference. Yeah. Set something in motion that has repercussions years to come. Yeah. And so that's always my prayer. That's my goal. Lord, what are you setting in motion? So there's some men listening to this right now that it's out of your time, out of your schedule. It may be inconvenient to do so, but maybe God is prompting you through this radio broadcast to say, I need to go there because God needs to set something in motion in your life.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I've done like a lot of conferences, and I've seen exactly that. I've seen so many people come to conferences who were looking for somebody to disciple them, and now they're on years of being discipled by a man that they met at a conference, which is, marriage is saved because of a word that they heard. So, I echo that. Like, I think it's worth coming to be in a room full of believers, you know?
Yeah, and we all believe that there are appointments. God sets appointments for people, and I've been praying in my mornings, Lord, just bring the guys that need to be here. You know who needs to be here? Remove every obstacle because, there is a devil and he's going to throw anything in front of you that he can to try to keep you from getting into the will of God. And, this is everything from guys are going to come tomorrow and they're going to receive Christ for the first time.
Yep.
And other guys are going to come and they're going to come back to Christ because they've been away. And other guys are going to come who are with the Lord, but they're going to get vision for their life and the calling that God has on them. So all of that stuff's happening,
Yeah. Pastor Brian, when I first started pastoring in Chicago, there were 4 men in the church. Mm-hmm. And I was so discouraged about the presence of men in urban America. And I would go up and down the pews of that little church and I would say, Jesus, give me 12 men. You had 12, just give me 12. Because I realized how few they are. And I believe sometimes it's harder to get men to church. It's harder to get them. But once they come to Christ and get a passion for Jesus, studies tell us that the ripple effect on marriage and family is huge, even compared to when a child comes to Christ or when the wife comes to Christ. It's huge ripple effects.
Wow. Absolutely.
So get your tickets, guys. men.cccm.com is the website. Like we talked about yesterday, if you were going to go surfing tomorrow, the ocean will be there next Saturday. The golf course will be there next Saturday. So the men's conference will not be here next Saturday. It'll be here tomorrow. So get there. men.cccm.com is the website. It's at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. And we're going to be back in just a little bit with more with our guests, Mark Jobe and Preston Perry, here on Pastor's Perspective.
Pastor's Perspective continues in just a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back. Pastor's Perspective continues with your question to 1-888-564-6173. And now here again is your host, Brian Perez.
All right, we are back with a couple of guys in the studio, along with Pastor Brian Broderson, but a couple of guys who are going to be at the 2020 Men's Conference at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa in Southern California. Mañana, tomorrow, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., men.cccm.com is the website. We've got Dr. Mark Jobe from the Moody Bible Institute here. You also hear him on the Bold Steps radio program. We've got spoken word artist Preston Perry, spoken word and evangelist, Preston Perry. Is this the right YouTube that I brought up here? Is this the one?
No, that's
not it. Okay, glad I didn't share that one with anybody. No. But okay, we'll find it. And
if you just type in Bold TV Preston Perry, it'd probably pop up.
Got it. Okay, I will do that. And Daryl Strawberry, the baseball legend, is going to be there as well tomorrow. So is author Drew Dick, and worship led by Josh Kerno. It's called Transformed. Is it true, Pastor Brian, that you're going to be dressed like Bumblebee from the Transformers movies?
That's right.
I knew it.
Yeah.
So come on out just for that to get a photo op with Pastor Brian.
Okay. One correction. I said before the break that the price was going up $20 tomorrow. No, the price is going up $5 tomorrow. The total is $20. So, yeah, I thought that was a little high, but you know.
Yeah,
but I was correct.
I didn't want to correct you though, because you're my pastor.
Well, thank God that Colin didn't feel that way. He corrected me, and I'm glad that he did. So,
but get your tickets today. Save that $5. Yeah. Men.cccm.com. Price goes up at midnight.
Yeah. So I want to keep going our conversation here with you guys. And Preston, I wanted to just talk a little bit, if you didn't mind, about your wife. I read Jackie's book when it first came out.
Yeah.
Gay Girl, Good God. And what a great book. What a great, powerful story. Thomas Terry is a friend of mine. Thomas, obviously, Jackie's with Humble Beast, right? Yeah. So I kind of had, just followed her and kind of interested in her story. And so God's put you guys together, a pretty dynamic duo between the two of you. So
she's the better half of the duo, for sure.
You know what shocked me about Jackie was honestly her age and the wisdom that she had for her age. Because I remember finding out she was like 28 years old. I thought, wait, she cannot be 28 because she's too wise.
Yeah.
And her, I listened to some of her Bible teaching, and I'm astounded at her ability to teach the word.
Yeah.
And so talk. I know you love your wife, so talk a little bit about her.
I like talking about Jackie more than anything. But yeah, man, she's a beautiful woman. Obviously I love her, but she's just a gift to the body. Jackie, she's from St. Louis, Missouri, and God kind of met her similar to how he met me in my room and saved her.
Yes.
Jackie, she always tell people that a lot of times people think that God just brought her from homosexuality and that's it, but no, God saved her holistically.
Yeah.
Like God wanted her to see that her whole life was in need of Jesus. So she would tell people that God saved me from lying, from being prideful, from stealing, from as well as homosexuality.
Yeah.
And she's always had a great gift of communicating the word and the gospel. She loves theology. She loves learning. She loves equipping young women with the gospel. And like you said, she wrote a book called "Gay Girl, Good God," and I just thought it was just right. It was just the right time to write it. Yeah. She's also a spoken word poet. So me and Jackie, we actually met out here in LA at the event that I told you about.
Right, yeah.
We were both doing spoken word poetry, and she was doing a poem called "My Life is a Stud," talking about how God took her out of the homosexual lifestyle, and I was doing a poem called "Soul Ties," and we became friends for 3 years, and we were really close, and then things changed. I was like, I think God want me to marry this woman, because the first time I saw her speak, I was kind of like how everybody else was. I was just amazed, not just about her knowledge for the word, but just her love and her passion for God's word and God's people.
Yeah.
We have 2 children, a 5-year-old and a 1-year-old.
Yeah.
And life is great.
And your 5-year-old is kind of a Instagram sensation herself.
Yeah. She we don't want her to know it yet. We be out in like Walmart and somebody, would notice her and like, how does that person know us again? I'm like, they just saw you on the phone.
Yeah. No, she's amazing. So many funny clips from her.
Yeah.
The book, and your whole story, the story of your romance, the story, all of that stuff is pretty detailed in the book.
Yeah.
And
I proposed to Jackie at an event out here in front of 3,000 people in a poem called Covenant, and so she put that poem in the book.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but God allowed our relationship to be very public, and for a long time it always confused me.
Yeah.
And now looking back at it, I just saw God's hand and God's sovereignty. In it, because I was Jackie's first boyfriend.
Yeah.
And I saw that God wanted me to display to the world how to love a broken woman, a woman who came from a hard lifestyle of molestation, of homosexuality, and a woman that was, to be quite frank, very hard to love. But I think what it did was, it showed the world that Christ's love for his church, that he pursues his church relentlessly. And even when we're jacked up and broken, he still loves us. So I think looking back now, I see that God wanted the world to see 2 broken people who love him and love each other. And we was very honest in our podcast about our failures, about our mistakes, about our hard times, and just try to be real people. Don't act like we have it all together. And I think people appreciate that.
And I think God's just given favor to her. He just decided, I'm going to take this person and I'm going to use her in this way.
Absolutely.
You probably know. Of course, Christopher Yuan. He teaches at your school. And do you know Chris?
Absolutely.
Yeah, Chris.
He's a really good friend of me and Jackie.
Yeah, and he's a good friend of mine as well. David Bennett in the UK, Beckett Cook out here in LA. And I was saying to these guys recently, we were all together, I was just saying, God's raised you guys up for this time. I mean, 20 years ago, you would not have had any kind of a voice at all. But now your voice, God has elevated these guys I think in the culture, so they can speak into this area that really needs to be spoken to, but they can speak into it from the inside rather than from the outside. And that's impactful. That's powerful.
It really is. And I think this is one of the big challenges of the church of this generation and the upcoming generation. A biblical understanding of gender, sexuality, grace-filled brokenness. There's so many extremes in the body of Christ right now.
Yeah.
And the Gen Z generation, there's a real, they've been enculturated by the society in terms of kind of their understanding of sexuality and needing to understand a more biblical, grace-filled version of what God intended. Yeah. That's a huge topic, huge topic for this generation, huge.
Yeah, I think one of me and Jackie's burden is teaching, mainly her, but teaching the church how to love on the homosexual community, because I think a lot of times we can treat homosexuality as if it's the whole century and not a branch on the century. And God hates all sin, right? But He loves people. And so I think that sometimes we do a lot of damage when we go into these communities and treating people like they're sin and not like people made in the Imago Dei, right? Made in the image of God, the image bearers. And I think that when we treat people like image bearers, we'll see a lot of people more more willing to come to the church and have real conversations.
And I think, from my experience, I think sometimes it's I think some of it's the propaganda of the devil, that the church hates gays and always has, and, all of that. But I would also say, being in pastoral ministry for 40 years, I know that there was a long season where even though you didn't necessarily intentionally put homosexuality in its own sin category, you actually ended up doing it. You just sort of almost just went there, And I think one of the greatest things that's happened through people like Jackie and others is the ability to recognize that you can actually be same-sex attracted and still be a faithful Christian. And that same-sex attraction is not the sin. The sin is giving into it and living according to it. And I think that is something that's liberating tons and tons of people. Now, some Christians still aren't getting that. Because I know even when we talk about it, sometimes we get pushback from people.
Well, that's really big, and I think not to cut you off, but I think the church have to do a better job of teaching people that when we come to Christ, God never promised us that we will not have temptation or not be tempted. He promised us to give us His Holy Spirit to overcome, to say no. Right? Jesus was tempted, but He had the power to say, "Flee." Flee from me, devil. And I think that's the sign of a Christian, somebody who has the power now to say no to sin. And I think sometimes we preach this narrative that no, you are how you feel. And that's just not the Bible.
No.
That's not the world we live in. That's not our reality.
I had the opportunity of restarting a church in the Lakeview neighborhood of Chicago, the highest concentration of gays and lesbians in the entire state of Illinois. And the Gay Pride Parade would pass through on a Sunday. And so I had some people in the congregation saying, "Pastor, what are we going to do about this? Look, it's passing right in front of our church on a Sunday, and it's a big, big deal." And so we talked a little bit with the elders and said, "This is what we're going to do." So we went out. It's usually in hot season. So we got bottles of water that said, "Thirsty, try Jesus." And we just went out and just gave out bottles of cold water to people that were driving by or walking by that said, "Thirsty, try Jesus," and loved them in that way. And I think like anybody else, like any other people, groups of people that are out there, anybody else that's struggling with anything in life, I think our first response is we love people with grace. And I would get emails practically every week saying, "Are you an affirming church? Are you an affirming church? Are you an affirming church? What happens if we walk in?" And I would always say our goal with everybody is to bring you to Jesus. That's our first goal, is to have you experience a living relationship with God. And then He's going to change your life in many areas, including sexuality, just like He changes everybody's life. But our first goal is not to change who you are. Our first goal is to bring you to Jesus. He does the changing.
Yeah.
And so
That's good.
It's difficult, though, when someone's identity is wrapped up in that.
Yeah.
As opposed to, this is what I do, this is who I am, and that's part of the challenge there.
Yeah.
You know, the amazing thing that I'm kind of seeing is pretty like a consistent sort of a thread. And Jackie, it starts with Jackie, her encounter with the Lord in her room by herself. She just suddenly has this Holy Spirit moment where she knows that she needs to get right with God.
Yeah.
And most of the people that I know who've come out of the gay world, that's a similar story to what's happening with each of them. You know, God is just meeting them in these extraordinary ways that's undeniable. It's like, they can't explain it psychologically. They can't, they can't be talked out of it. I don't know. Do you know David Bennett? Are you guys?
No,
okay. He wrote the book, The War of Loves is what his book's called. It's a great book. But David's a young gay activist in Sydney. And, he's in his university. He's the guy who's got the gay parade going and everything else. And, a girl pulls him aside, takes him into a pub, starts sharing Jesus with him. And all of a sudden, he's like, Jesus met him in the pub, and just, changed his life. And, he's been on a journey. He's at Oxford now. He's getting his PhD in philosophy at Oxford. But he's with Ravi Zacharias' ministry. Yeah. But all of these stories, I just think, this is God just sovereignly just putting His hand on people saying, okay, I'm going to meet you right where you're at. I'm going to save you, and I'm going to take you, and I'm going to sanctify you through a process of time, and I'm going to tell your story.
And I think that's the beautiful thing about the gospel.
Yeah.
Because me and Jackie, we get a lot of people asking us who are intrigued by our marriage. A lot of people ask Jackie, well, how did you stop being gay, or how did you stop liking women? And Jackie said, she's honest. She said, I still have an attraction for women. It didn't stop, but I love God more. And He gave me a desire not for men, but for one man. Right? And that's the way God intended it. And a lot of people ask me, well, how is it being, married to somebody who used to be gay? Is it hard? It was like, well, no, because my hope isn't in Jackie. My hope is in the one who saved Jackie. And my past lifestyle, in a lot of ways, and I think we don't realize it, was unnatural as well.
Absolutely.
Right? God ordained marriage between one man and one woman. Right? So anything outside of that design is unnatural. So the same hope that Jackie has in the God who saved me, not to go out here and sleep with all these women, is the same hope that I have in the God who saved her. So that's what we tell everybody all the time.
And I think that realization too, kind of what we said earlier, it's like, everybody's a sinner. And, some people have a more pronounced manifestation of one sin than the others, but it's all the same thing, really, at the end of the day. But I think sometimes we kind of forget that. We kind of see sin as, we got our list over here. Well, that's that.
That's the worst.
I'm not that.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, no, but actually these things are, when you look at the list of the works of the flesh in Galatians 5, that's always the telltale text there, because, man, everything's lumped together. It's like, wait a second, you mean gossip and slander, like that goes along with fornication and idolatry? Whoa, that's, it's good to keep it biblical, right? We keep we keep everything focused. Mark, I want to ask you a totally different question. And this question has to do with the fact that you're Dr. Mark Jobe, and you're the president of Moody Bible Institute, as well as the pastor of a church. So like I mentioned earlier, you said today you started pastoring when you were 21 years old. And I think you graduated from Moody, right?
I did.
You had gone to. So how did you get into this educational track that led you to getting a doctorate that now has landed you as the president of Moody Bible Institute?
Well, let me say this, first of all, that I had no aspirations of leading any kind of institution of higher education. So that was never my goal. I jumped into a doctorate really because a friend of mine said, hey, let's stretch ourselves to learn and grow more. And so 3 pastors at the church, we decided, hey, we're gonna, for the sake of just having ourselves being pushed to grow more. And I completed a doctorate. Half the time I was asking, why am I doing this? This is a lot of work, but it would stretch me to grow, and I learned, and I just put it on the side. And it was through a series of circumstances. Little did I know that God was preparing me for a transition.
Yeah.
And as God often does, he was preparing the track in advance. I didn't know it was a transition to being the president of Moody. But I had started to, 3 years before this, I had started to ask myself, if I were to die tomorrow or get hit by a car, or I would move to Europe, how would our ministry do if I were to be taken away immediately? I never asked myself that question. And I felt like, hey, I got tons of time in front of me to continue to minister. But I made a plan out of 7 areas I needed to transition out of. Without planning on leaving. I was committed to going to continue to do this ministry, but I think God was preparing a pathway. Part of it is I did almost all of the preaching, and I started to bring in some other preaching. I transitioned out of several areas. And then I got a call from Moody asking if I would consider becoming the president of Moody Bible Institute. And to be honest with you, my first response, I love Moody. I love that it's the heart of the city. I went there. My sister went there. My son went there. 15 of our 32 pastors are graduates from Moody.
And real quick, your sister is not Carrie Jobe.
My sister's not. No,
ask.
she's not Carrie Jobe.
Okay.
But I said, but I don't necessarily want to lead this. I love it. I back it and support it. But as we prayed and fasted, my wife and I came to a growing. I felt like God really impressed this on my mind. I will give you clarity in the process. By the time we had finished that process, I knew I would be disobedient to say no. So 14 months ago, I stepped into the position of president of Moody Bible Institute. I asked the board, though. I said, I'm a pastor by calling, so I want to be engaged in ministry. And so if you allow me to continue to pastor as a volunteer, but I continue to preach and pastor, I want to do that. And they agreed to do that. So I still am engaged. On this past Sunday, I led a bunch of people to Christ, put my arm around a tatted up gangbanger and prayed with them. So I'm still engaged in hands-on ministry, but I also am the president of Moody. So I tell people, I think I'm a better president if my hands are involved in ministry.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because you're kind of keeping yourself in the real world, so to speak.
And the goal of Moody's goal is to train people, empower people, release people to live on mission with Jesus. And so I think that I want to live on mission, and I want to prepare people that live on mission.
Yeah,
it's good.
I think it's fascinating that, this was just something that you and a couple friends had as sort of a challenge, that you're going to push yourself a little further.
It was. And so 2 of us completed our doctorate. One of them is still working on it. He will go unnamed. We won't mention him. But it was a real wrestle and a challenge, because it has to be sort of a spirit-led deal. So my first day at Moody, I asked the 95-year-old evangelist, Dr. George Sweeting, who was the president when I was there, and he was an evangelist. He, like you, evangelist. He did drawing. You do spoken word. He did drawing, but he was an evangelist. Wow. And I said, could you pray over me? And so my first day, January the 2nd, 2019, I knelt with a bunch of staff around me on the second floor, knelt, and he prayed over the phone. And he prayed that the mantle of leadership and anointing and authority would fall. It was kind of this divine moment in which I say, okay, God, I embrace this mantle. People say, well, has your calling changed? My calling hasn't changed. I have the same calling. I just have a different position to fulfill that calling. My calling has always been to spread the gospel to the uttermost parts of the world, to let as many people know about Jesus as possible. And part of it's training people to do that. Part of it's proclaiming myself. So my calling hasn't changed, but the angle, my position to fulfill that calling has altered.
And you know, that there's something that's important, I think, for even our listeners to hear, because we can kind of just get fixed in a sort of a certain thing, and you know, we can even do it for a long time and then just think that this is it. But God might have some new things down the road, and we need to continue to stay open. So I'm 63. At 62 years old, I joined a master's program. It's like, what am I doing in a master's program? You know, I've already been 40 years in ministry. And and the invitation, I was invited into this cohort, and my initial response was no. Of course not. I mean, you know, I'm too busy as it is, and why do I need to do this? And you know, the funny thing was, the Lord just began to speak to me, and I just started to sense like the Lord wanted me to do it. And I was like, no, Lord, this can't be, because, you know, what is the point? And so I felt like the Lord said, you know, look at the curriculum, look at the schedule. So I sat down, I kind of went over it, and, you know, Lord said, you can do this.
Yeah.
Really? I can do it? You know, if you discipline yourself, you can do it. And so anyway, to make a long story short, you know, I stepped in, and I'm currently in that program. That's how you and I met, Mark. But you know, I'm a bit shocked, but it's a good thing. And I think, wow, Lord, this is great. You know, to just see that unexpected stuff. As long as we just stay open to the leading of the Spirit, you never know where God's going to lead you.
You never know. And here's what I want to say, Pastor Brian, to you and to many others that are sort of in that stage of life. Sometimes I think these are the most compelling years of your life, to be honest with you. People that have walked with Jesus over a long period of time and have a track record of loving their wife and a history with Jesus, you're in high demand if you engage in mentoring the next generation. This young generation can Google information quicker than you and I can spin our head. But listen, there is a shortage of spiritual fathers that love Jesus and are willing to mentor the next generation. So I believe that they're godly men and women that are seasoned and have followed him for a long time. I think this season can be the most compelling, most fruitful seasons of our life if we mentor the next generation.
Good. I love it. I receive it. So we're out of time.
Yes, we are out of time, but thank you so much for joining us today in the studio with Mark Jobe and Preston Perry, two of the guys who are going to be at the 2020 Men's Conference tomorrow at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. You can still get your tickets at men.cccm.com. Daryl Strawberry is going to be there as well. So is Drew Dick, and worship led by Josh Kerno. It's going to be a great day from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. men.cccm.com. Get your tickets before midnight because the price goes up a few bucks after midnight. So get them tonight or get them after midnight or purchase them at the gate. Thanks so much for joining us today. Good night.
Thanks for listening to Pastor's Perspective. We trust you've been blessed and had your question answered. Join us Monday through Friday and follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Pastor's Perspective. The preceding was sponsored by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, California.